966.
Joining us now on the 966, Dr. Abdulaziz Alghashian, Saudi researcher and writer who joins us from Riyadh. Dr. Aziz was our guest for episode 70 of the 966. We talked about his work and research on Saudi-Israeli relations and foreign policy dynamics in the region. Probably the quickest turnaround in our 966 history in terms of welcoming a guest back so quickly. But it's our honor. Dr. Abdulaziz, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you. And I didn't realize I was one of the quickest turnaround guests. So I'm the honored one. I'm the honored one. Thank you so much for this. I mean, it's such a. If I could just have it in a frame somehow, and I'll make sure I'll.
You got it. No problem.
Yeah. Dr. Abdulaziz, what should we make of this agreement?
Well, I mean, I think as we mentioned, it was indeed significant, and I think it was it was a significant development. But I think the cooperation and the fact that it was the fact that they actually agreed on something official, in my opinion, in my estimation, wasn't overly surprising. I think if people looked at the Jeddah summit and the rhetoric from the Jeddah summit, is that it was clear that the Saudi elite, the ruling elite there, they kind of made their position clear. Which is that it's really extending their hand to Iran. And I think it was also extending the Saudi hand, but also with a joint Arab bloc, a unified Arab hand, especially with the GCC plus. So for the viewers, that means Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan. So that gave them a position to really approach Iran and extend the hand. So, but I think what was maybe surprising, to be honest, was the fact that it jumped straight to normalization of relations and resuming of diplomatic ties. I think that was the thing that made people think, wow, okay, this is, we know. I personally expected steps a bit less than that, but as we said, there's never a dull moment in the Middle East.
Well, so this is an interesting twist because Saudi Arabia and Iran have been engaging since 2021 under the auspices of Iraq and Oman. five sort of meetings where they got together, talked about their issues, and just for the viewers, and you, Aziz, you have more information on this, but Saudi Arabia and Iran severed diplomatic relations in 2016. So it's been 7 years. But the conversation has been going on, and there's been interest. Yet, in a span of 4 days, essentially, when you have a Iranian representative and a Saudi representative in China, from March 6 to 10. The decision was made. So it wasn't done under the auspices of Iraq or Oman. It was done under the auspices of China. So what's the meaning of this? Does this have extra impact? Was there a sense that doing it with China was a better political choice for both parties than doing it with Iraq or Oman?
It's really the China angle here is very interesting. For me, I think before we get to China, so the groundwork with Iraq and Oman was already done. The heavy lifting was already done through their part, in my opinion. I mean, they were the ones that really helped facilitate the understandings, and of course generate the will. That meant that they were both facilitating that Saudi-Iranian will that was taking place. When it came to, the China angle is also very interesting because there's a lot of parallels here and a lot of overlapping alignments. So China is Saudi's biggest trade partner. China is also the actor that could really use any significant leverage on Iran. So here you have this situation where it really made a lot of sense for Saudi, Iran, and China to, for China to have this, to facilitate this proper this agreement. And I think not too long ago in the the Riyadh China summit, a few months ago in December, Saudi was happy that China uttered those statements regarding Iran. That they were basically blaming them for some of the instability in the region. And I think now for me that made Saudi realize, okay, now people understand our grievances with Iran. Now the international landscape are more appreciative of this notion and the dynamics that we have. Now let's start and begin this kind of cooperation. Now let's kind of address our problems on that landscape, on that foundation. And also what's I think more meaningful here is the international relations of the Middle East. The dynamics of the international relations of the Middle East is changing. It's also being, more actors are playing a role. China is now, of course, still the biggest economic foreign actor, but now it's having a diplomatic portfolio in the region.
That one thing, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, and that's good stuff, Aziz. The Xi visit to Saudi Arabia made the Saudis happy, made the Iranians very unhappy. Yeah. So that visit to Saudi was in December. The Iranians were almost immediately in China in February complaining. But that leads to exactly what you're saying is China is positioned here. It has significant economic relationships with both countries. It can play a mediating role. It can play maybe a supervisory role. The big question here is if and will it. And I say that because there's coming out of it, a lot of the conversation was, okay, this is great for Saudi Arabia because hopefully Iran will stop meddling in Yemen. And Iran, as we know, is the leading provider of training, material, arms, support to the Houthis in Yemen. Is that expectation too strong? Is it too ambitious? And if it doesn't happen, what does China do? Do they do anything?
Well, I mean, I think in your introduction, you mentioned that Saudi Arabia and Iran had previous agreements, especially the 2001 agreement. And I think it was June 2001 where they made that security agreement. So firstly, the intent to cooperate was there. The precedent of cooperation was there. But why wasn't it long? Where was the longevity in that? Why didn't that last? And I think because these were agreements, they weren't actions. I think now the core theme or the main glue of the Saudi-Iranian relationship that will give it that longevity, hopefully, and this time, is the economic actor, or the economic factor. For me, I think what's really interesting here, what I also heard from the Jeddah summit in July, I think it was July, right? July 2022. It was that there was a theme of regional integration and economic regional integration. And that's what really, the Crown Prince, MBS is reminding the audience of constantly. He's always reminding people of a thriving region, not a thriving Saudi Arabia. So with that, where can Iran play a role here? And this is something even the Jordanian king said. Jordanian King Abdullah said, is like, well, we have these projects, and if I was Iran, I would ask, where do I fit within these projects? So I think the thing that's going to give it that longevity, and I think what makes this different than any other rapprochement before, was the fact that, listen, there are economic incentives here. And even the Minister of Finance, Al-Jad'an, said, we don't see any reason why we can't invest in Iran immediately. There's a lot of potential there. So clearly you could see the economic angle into this, and that basically, listen, if Saudi wants, or if Iran wants to meddle and destabilize and all these things that basically are attributed to its regional activity, then it's really going to go against itself. because that means the economies here and are going to be slightly affected by each other a lot more. So this is where I think this is why this approach is a lot newer, and I think will give it a lot more longevity in the long run.
It's interesting if you look at the Crown Prince and look at Saudi foreign policy over the last 18 months. And this includes all the way going back to the resolution of the dispute with Qatar and renewed relations with Turkey, even the growing relations and trade and new agreements with Iraq, which that's been kind of a cold. It hadn't been a warm relationship, even though that's an important partner and an immediate neighbor. I would even include the OPEC Plus meeting of October. In that, it's clear from what Saudi foreign policy has been over the last 18 months, clear to me anyway, is that they are doing everything possible to preserve the chances of the Vision 2030 project to succeed. Trying to deconflict the region as much as possible. And there's a little bit of in this, you take this agreement, China oversee it, supervise it. All right, that's fine. A lot of people in the U.S., said that's a big deal, but the fact is the U.S. couldn't make this agreement. We don't have a relationship with Iran. So this is in the best interest of Saudi Arabia. Clearly, it was in the interest of Iran. You heard the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, talking about, look, we're too isolated. Go fix things to his people. We're just completely isolated and it's not helping us. We need to do better with this. So they had motivation on two parties. You had a governing body, essentially China. There's another angle here, and let's talk about the players who weren't immediately involved. Let's talk about the U.S. How should the U.S. The public line is this is great. Saudis kept us surprised. This is important. We want the players in the region talking to each other. We want things deconflicted. Can we take that as the assessment of the U.S. position on this and leave it at that, or is there more?
No, I think, you mentioned a very interesting thing, because the fact that we keep on, or the region, especially when it comes to China or Russia, seems to be, or relations with China or Russia seem to always instigate reports about this is coming at the cost of the United States or relations with the West, or that this is a pivot away from the United States. And I think this is very zero-sum. In my opinion, this is what's taken place, is that, okay, no, this is not coming at the expense of the Saudis' relations or Iranian relations or regional relations with the United States. Excuse me. It really addresses something, or it speaks to the theme that, what you mentioned was that the United States couldn't do this, and it just wasn't better positioned to do this, and China was better positioned to facilitate this. It was a sticky subject, by the way. It wasn't that the deal was done and China came at the end. There's a very good report about this that I read about from Anna Jacobs and Dina Esferandi. I hope I got her name right. From Crisis Group. And they write that, okay, there were actually sticking points there, and the Chinese government and officials really helped facilitate that. Now, okay, don't think the US was in better position to do this, especially if there was a lot more of an economic aspect to this. The US, with its position, does not have the leverage probably that Saudi would have required or thought of to help get it over the hump, or over the will. Sorry, what the hell am I talking about? Over the barrier, over the hump. There you go. So, but what does this mean for Saudi-American relations? I don't think this comes at the cost of it. I think even Hussein Ibish mentioned this also in his work recently, when he wrote about the Arab-China summit, and that this relationship that's taking place between Saudi Arabia and China is carefully managed, and it's also being carefully perceived by the US, and it's not at the cost of their relationship. So I think here, Saudi's doing a very good job at balancing its relations with foreign with superpowers. So in other words, I could say Saudi's doing a good job at balancing its superpower policies. And I think, you know, this is what we're starting to see this also. We're starting to see a more, you know, a more semi-traditional Saudi-like, you know, where they're vague. Sometimes you know, the statements are not as explicit as it used to be. Sometimes you know, there's this certain ambiguity that that gave it you know, some kind of gave it a little bit of robustness to circumnavigate international turbulence. So, you know, so I think they're proving that they're really managing this relationship very well. But there's still, unfortunately, turbulence, I think, with the United States. Now, this comes against the backdrop of already existing turbulence between Saudi Arabia and the United States. But there's something else that I really wanted to mention about, which is there's another theme here, not just China playing a diplomatic role and having a diplomatic portfolio, but also we're starting to see a regional agency in the international arena, that the Middle East is gaining agency, that the Middle East is not being overly influenced or affected by what's taking place what's taking place on the international landscape. So you actually mentioned that about the OPEC plus. This was something, you know, this kind of really reminded me of this, and it also reminded me that, you know, that these actors, Oman, Iraq, were able to do some heavy lifting and the third-party negotiations that facilitated, you know, two heavyweights in the region. So we're starting to see a region that's taking responsibility for its own actions in healing, finding ways to heal and repair its own relations. It's interesting.
Well,
it's very
apparently great minds think alike, because we had a conversation with Dr. John Alterman, who we have tremendous respect for. He's the Center for Strategic International Studies, and he used that term as well, agency. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And I might even you know, take a point with you in when you said, you know, it's being, you know, the policy is the policy since literally, and I take the invasion of Ukraine and Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022 as sort of the onset of clarity in terms of exactly this agency. And by that I mean, because, you know, as a result of that, rallying of the EU, NATO, and US against this, and you know, wanting the rest of the world to come along, everyone put their cards on the table. And Saudi Arabia said, look, we are masters of our future. We are not your little brother. We will maintain relationships with China. We will maintain relationships with Russia. It doesn't mean we don't want a relationship with you. And you know, if you were to read the tea leaves, you might even conclude we really prefer a relationship with you if you can come through on these key issues. But to me, there's been more clarity in the relationship in the last 6 months, 8 months, than there have been in the previous 20 years. If you ask me. By that, I just think people are really saying what they feel and meaning what they say.
Yeah. And
I don't think that's been characteristic so much of the relationship in the past. I think people have been, you know, the Saudis have been unhappy with it. Americans have been unhappy with it. You know, they've worked, and the key elements have been there. But I absolutely think agency is a proper term and an appropriate term for what's going on in the region. And I believe, you know, beginning with that Alula summit, I think it was January 2021. You know, it really appears that, you know, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said, I'm not back on my heels anymore post Khashoggi. You know, that for me, I'm moving past that. I'm going to be a regional leader, and my vision for this area is not as a regional head, but as a global agent, sort of the axis. I think you see Saudi Arabia as an axis of, Europe, Asia, Africa. And to me, it's, the Saudis, it has been more clear these last, as I said, 6 to 8 months than it has been previously.
No,
I would.
Sorry, go ahead. No, after you go.
We talked when we last had you on. We were talking about the prospects of normalization with Israel, and of course, the talking heads come out of this, and and I think you put your finger on it really nicely. Talking heads for the U.S., a lot of them were zero sum. Well, if the Chinese, get good PR out of this, then it must be bad for us. So that's how they were looking at it. Smarter people were like Hussein Ibish, who you referenced. We're looking at it in a more nuanced view. Talking heads, on this say, okay, Israel's prospects for normalization are now off the table, because obviously, if Saudi Arabia is coordinating, have diplomatic relations, more friendly relations with their arch enemy, Israel's arch enemy, Iran, then our relationship with Saudi Arabia has changed.
Yeah.
What's your take on this?
Well, I think, firstly, I really agree with a lot of what you said. And I wanted to expand upon this before I go to the Israeli part, because that's very, very interesting. When it comes to, well, John Alterman, I had the pleasure of meeting also, and he's a fantastic guy, to be honest. So he's someone I appreciate. He's a real good guy. For me, when it comes, I just want to try to trace back how old, or try to trace back how old this regionalization that the Crown Prince was talking about. It was actually in Davos in the desert in 2018 when he mentioned, he's like, listen, I want to see this a prosperous region. This is my personal fight. This is my personal battle. And I want everyone to be prosperous in the region. And this is where I think the beginning of this rapprochement began, or the seeds of the rapprochement began, because he said, even with Qatar, despite our problems with them, we still want them to be successful, and we still want them to be thriving. So for me, that really sent a message of saying, wow, there is a real change in perception and intention from the Saudi ruling elite here. And that, obviously they're expanding upon this. And I think with the whole aspect of regionalization, so and agency, et cetera. So, and he said, okay, we're going to try to be the new haven of economy, of investment, et cetera. So, and with that can't happen unless we're all getting along. And speaking of getting along, or the lack of, with the situation with Israel, I mean, again, this is very similar to what the U.S. China angle is regarding Saudi normalization with Iran. As in, some people viewed this at the cost of the Saudi-Iranian normalization was viewed at the cost of the United States, at Saudi's relations with the United States. And of course, we're arguing here that this is too simplistic. And I think also with the prospect of normalization with Saudi Arabia and Israel, what was pushing for that normalization, in our last episode that we kind of mentioned this, what was pushing for that normalization wasn't Iran. It wasn't a commonality of the threat perception of Iran. It was really the economy. It was also the fact that they could help each other with this regionalization taking place. But of course, the dynamics are very different. The Saudi perception with Israel is that, and it made itself clear. It made itself clear, and especially now, given the loonies that are in the government in Israel, which, by the way, I mean, it's creating a lot of silver lining here, because it's showing how so many people are against, within Israel, are against these racist sentiments and against this, and they're pro-Arab, they're pro-human rights, they're pro, all these things. So there's a lot to take away from that constructively. But I think what happened, and if I want to add my own twist to this, Saudi now, the aspect of regional integration of Iran is something that Saudi is going to have to take into account when it looks at Israel also. Because in my opinion, what I really can gain from the Jeddah summit in 2022, in the summer of 2022, was that it seemed to me that it preferred a rapprochement with Iran than it did with Israel. That the security concern was better addressed with Iran than it is with Israel. Because with Israel, things can be, things could be gained, things could be understood in many different avenues. When it comes to Iran, the security issue is far greater for Saudi Arabia. So it's a far more of a priority. Now, when it comes to normalization, I don't think Saudi, if the conditions that the Saudis met, and I think recently there was a New York Times piece, I don't know if you guys read about the Saudis' price for normalization, when there was concessions, and I think we also talked about this before in our last meeting about the shifting of burden and concessions, that apparently it's still there, but what's even more on top of that was the Palestinian issue too, that there has to be some sort of concession, Israeli concession towards the Palestinian issue. So, you know, it's becoming more complex, but at the same time, it's not overly attached. So I don't think, I mean, so many people think it's attached. Yair Lapid kind of immediately criticized the government and said, there you go, you know, it was because of this government, you know, they pushed Saudi Arabia to the Iranians, our arch enemy, et cetera, et cetera. And this is part of the politicization that's taking place that's been going on anyway. So too many people are attaching the whole Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia triangle too much, and it's not overly attached. But now I think that, you know, it's influencing each other a little bit.
I agree, and Lucian, I see it all the time, and I think it's something we talked about when we had you on the show. A lot of the narrative, quote unquote narrative, a lot of the compulsion for normalization is being driven by pro-Israeli voices. You know, they'd like to see it. Of course, they'd like to see it. And to your point, I agree 100%. For Saudi Arabia, happy to have a relationship with Israel that means there's technological commerce interaction, things that help, again, the Vision 2030 project. Normalization is somewhat down the road, if it's anything at all. And I will say that conversation with you, I thought was brilliant. It was really educational to me, because that was when it became clear, was you made the very clear point. It says, look, the onus, interestingly enough, we think about if normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, well, of course, there's going to be serious concessions on the occupied territories, Palestinians, maybe East Jerusalem, these sorts of things. That's the sort of the old school. But you made a very good point, and as I said, it was an education to me, is no, the onus is going to be on the U.S. To fulfill these asks, that Saudi Arabia has. And just for clarity, that New York Times article, it was March 11th. It's worth reading. Saudi Arabia offers its price to normalize relations with Israel.
There's a researcher they reference in there too.
It's written by Michael Crowley, Vivian Nareem, and Patrick Kingsley.
Yeah.
But I guess what's that?
You have it in front of you?
I do.
They got a great quote in there from somebody. I'm trying to think who they got the quote in there
well,
from.
I wanted to. This
is Dr. Aziz. Yeah, he's quoted in it.
Well, I'll read what the ask is, and I want you to read the quote. All right. Sure. And then we applaud. All right. We should have. We need better graphics on the 960s. We need fireworks going off and these sorts of things. Yeah. All right. So the ask, quote unquote, is security guarantees from the United States, help with developing a civilian nuclear program, fewer restrictions on U.S. arms sales. So those are things, obviously, for Saudi Arabia, are very important to its national defense and security, and it also, for Saudi Arabia, removes the ambiguity of what is the U.S. commitment, which is a major concern. But the brilliant quote that Lucian is now going to read is,
Wait, I thought we were going to make Dr. Aziz read it, so we have the original voiceover of it. Yeah,
no, I think this is an homage to Dr. Aziz.
I don't have it. I don't actually have it up in front of me. So
hold on
if you give
a
me a
second.
second, I can do it. But I was thinking we
Oh,
could
I
have
got
the
it.
voice itself.
I got it.
Richard, I think we may just need you to read it for
Given
expediency.
given the difficult relationship, the Saudi offer could be interpreted as, quote, a rhetorical move, unquote, said Abdulaziz Alghashian, a Saudi researcher who studies his country's policy towards Israel. The goal might be to put Mr. Biden in an awkward position, refusing to deliver an agreement that Israel badly wants, an outcome that could disappoint Jewish American groups with political clout. Dr. Alghashian said it was unlikely that Saudi officials would actually facilitate a major foreign policy for victory for Mr. Biden while he was still president, given their grievances with his administration. Quote, the Saudi ruling elite do not want Biden to be the American president to take credit for Saudi-Israeli normalization, but they don't mind Biden taking the blame for its absence, he said, unquote.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
You know what's interesting? You know how these things, this is funny, all these things, this is above my pay grade. I don't know. I'm not in the room with Saudi policymakers at the very highest level.
Neither am I, but it doesn't stop me. It doesn't stop the 966 though.
So you say.
There was a discussion recently, and you know how these things, common themes, on the releasing of Iranian U.S. hostage, American hostages held by Iran, 79, and basically the sense in the Iranian leadership that we will not release these to President Carter. Yeah. He doesn't get that win. Yeah, incoming President Reagan gets that wing, and maybe we get something out of it. I'm just saying there's always deeper blows to all of this. Yeah. But anyway, on that Israeli relationship, and I think you talked about it, and I think we all agree that that the pressure, the supposed inevitability of normalization is usually from pro-Israeli groups or voices. Yeah. So let's get back to this agreement. Fascinating stuff. What's the likelihood that the Iranians abide by?
It's going to be, in my opinion, I think you will see something of a lot of patience by Saudi Arabia. And the reason being is because it goes back to this question of agency again. Because one of the things that we need not overlook are the proxies that Iran supports. Now, those proxies, they're like sort of, I would consider them almost like genie bottles. So once you open them, okay, I'm not sure you could put it back in the bottle again. So these things, because they do have their grievances too. They also have their own agency as well. So the fact, and they were going to shed light on that. They're also very proud to show that they're not, Iranian extensions of Iran. They're actually, their own political entities, their own kind of, they have their own identity and their own agenda, and they don't speak to anybody, or they don't answer to anybody. Of course, this is limited, so, but it's going to be difficult to see how Iran manages that. And I think that's what the Saudi perception will be, or the Saudi eyes will be. But they know it's not going to be that simple. Because once you open that kind of, open that door, it's not easy to close. So there was a saying that King Fahd, when I think he was crown prince, said to Saddam Hussein before he invaded Iraq. He said, listen, Saddam, don't invade. When he invaded Iran. He said, listen, Saddam, don't invade, okay? Because the keys to war is in your hands. To starting the war is in your hands. But the keys to close it is not in your hands. Or the keys to stop it is not in your hands. So it's the same thing with these proxies. You could have the same principles that, okay, you could start them, you could support them. Okay, where are these weapons going to go now? They're all going to stop. They're individuals too. So it's going to take a lot of negotiation. And I think the Saudis realize this, therefore they normalize relations. That they need to keep that channel of communication open and direct and still and build, because I think they know that it's a work in progress. but I do feel somewhat optimistic because I think the region has had enough, and I think people have had enough. I think the entire region, and I think the Saudi ruling elite, as well as other elites in the GCC, as well as Iran and others, have realized, okay, this is just not sustainable. We all have something in common, which is global turbulence. So we need to be, working together. So I think that alongside the economic factor and the glue, that economic glue is going to give it that momentum, at least, that safety net, at least to keep building these relations and really have that intention of solving these issues and having their own mechanisms. So I think, again, it's, they're taking responsibility and they're taking initiative, which is, it's very, very good to see as a citizen of the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very important perspective, Aziz, that this is just a start. And like I said, we have 2 months to figure out some details about just opening embassies and that sort of thing. And it's just starting the conversation and see where it goes. I do think it's in keeping with your description of agency and having had enough. It's a rejection of the sort of Trump administration maximum pressure on Iran as a failed. It has not achieved what might have been hoped to have achieved, either in terms of the regime behavior or regime being ousted. And that let's take control of our destiny here, and let's deconflict and try and move this along in something we think is more creative and more has more potential.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the whole, I think one of the reasons why I think this is a good approach, in my opinion, is because that whole, indeed, you're right, that maximum pressure campaign, for me, I think it only entrenches the Iranian regime. Not only it doesn't weaken it, because they
That's
have
what
their
history shows.
Exactly. I mean, it hasn't worked. I mean, it literally hasn't worked. And the IRGC and their history, they're very mobile and flexible and multifaceted, and that they adjusted to sanctions. And therefore, these sanctions, unlike, for example, Iraq with Saddam Hussein after the 1990s, where they didn't have the skill or the ability to adapt to these sanctions. Iranians, no, the Iranian regime, I would say, adopted to this too. They adopted well, and therefore it wasn't a viable option. As you said, history shows that they just thrived. I mean, more and more literature comes out about the black market and the IRGC black market and the IRGC and how they control this and they control that and they influence. Black markets wouldn't have been there without the sanctions. So, this is another way of confronting the issue in a more open and diplomatic and honest way. And I think in some ways it's there's a certain spirit here, I think, which is the most important thing, is that this is coming after a phase of a lot of antagonism. This is coming after an era of, I would say, an experimental phase in the Middle East, where people wanted to meet head on and really wanted to impose the will of the other. And it realized that this is just too costly. This is just not really good for anybody. And in order for us to be to be a thriving region, we really need to thrive here and iron out these differences. But I think there's also another thing that's very important here, and that's the cultural aspects. And I think people are factoring in the cultural aspects within this relationship too. And other tracks, by the way, that supported this, that supported the commonality. I mean, I was in a meeting recently, and I'll be honest, I couldn't believe how much Saudi Arabia and Iran actually already cooperated before the normalization. I mean, there's a lot of aspects that they agree on, that they work on, that but unfortunately, as you say, the narrative is always designed to be antagonistic. And so, it's a lot of us, what we're doing here, and activists that are trying to, show, hey, we're not in favor of, nobody's Now I won't say nobody's in favor, but us at least, we're not, we're not really pro-conflict people, we're not pro get them people. We're pro let's get together kind of people. And so, and thankfully that kind of energy, it spilled over into the political aspects, and long may it continue, hopefully.
There's an important in terms of Saudi Arabia and what it wants to see in terms of preserving the 2030 projects. There's those that argue that maximum pressure was effective in terms of strangling funds for all the Iranian proxies, the non-state proxies, actors it has in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Palestine and Yemen. That's their argument. Those non-state proxies are in place because Iran recognized it had to respond in an asymmetric manner. I agree with you 100%. What happens when you set these things up is it's a genie and you open it up and it causes problems. And I don't know how they put the genie back in the bottle, because every one of these local constituencies have local issues and local priorities that, they love Iranian support and that sort of thing, but, they don't necessarily stop just because Iran wants to stop. My point is really, in order for this relationship, this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran to get its full run, Iran and the U.S. have to reach some sort of accommodation, because so much of Iranian response is a perceived, attack by its neighbors, Israel and the U.S. And so many of these tools that they've established over these last 30, 40 years is in response to that. Obviously, they have baggage with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and other things, but in the big picture, it'd be, if you have good relationships with Saudi Arabia, that's awesome and it had real benefits, but you're still in a war footing because you've got the U.S. and Israel. And so it's going to be interesting to see if there's any movement on that part, because I think that's the other thing to follow, to really start easing the region. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I agree completely. And not only that, I think, this is why it's really, I appreciate you guys, because you guys bring really excellent. I mean, even my brother saw this before the last clip, and I'm like, Aziz, man, those two guys, they're really, really awesome, because they know how to ask really good questions, and they're really accurate and they're really good. So obviously you guys are getting a lot of fans here in Saudi. But what your point really, why is it really good? Because I think it speaks to one of the core issues that Iran had with Saudi. And it was that it viewed Saudi as part of the American camp, right? And I think what Saudi did was that it kind of removed itself from the American camp. And I won't say put itself in this camp or other camp, but it's no longer a core grievance, in my opinion. I think it addressed the core grievance that Iran had with Saudi, is that this is now part of, an organic aspect here, that this isn't part of an American camp. Because when you speak to Iranians, and I said this to them, and I said, one of the issues is that when you keep talking about Saudi, you keep talking about it's not about what you say about Saudi, it's what you don't say. Because you keep talking about the United States and it's occupying Saudi land and etc., as if Saudis had no option. And this is obviously very kind of very insulting, I would say, But I think it removed itself from that, therefore addressing one of the core issues that Iran perhaps had. But also, I think now it's part of the Iran-American aspect, that it's another theme where Saudi's not just an obstacle, but Saudi can be actually a facilitator to this too, because they have facilitated these things. In 1997, they it was there was a time where I think under the the Clinton administration, I think he would be very happy if I said that, Clinton. The Clinton administration, where I think they were very much eager to really use a heavy hand towards Iran, but it was the Saudis that intervened, that tried to co-opt them, and they mediated something. So there is a new function that we could see now, a more constructive role and we're just gonna. But it's not overly affected by it if it doesn't succeed. Saudi won't be affected by it.
Yeah, and if you're a Saudi leadership right now, you're saying let the good times roll. We've had a great 2022, 2023 is looking up as well. So let's keep it going. Dr. Abdulaziz Alghashian, Saudi researcher, go-to quote for the New York Times as well. Does his research on Saudi-Israeli relations and foreign policy dynamics in the region. Dr. Abdulaziz, thank you so much. We hope to keep this clip going of having you come about every 10 guests or so, because you're just so wonderful. Thank you so much.
That's my pleasure. It's honestly, it's my pleasure. And there was 10 guests. This time we could make it 9. And then all of a sudden
it went down. Yep. And then you're just one of us.
2 plus 1. And we'll just have 2 plus 1, 9. Great to be with you guys, Colby. Thank you guys so much.